He quietly followed his daughter, making sure she didn't see him. When she reached the bus stop, some kids were already there. He hid behind a tree and watched as the bus arrived. The other kids started getting on, but he saw someone stop her with a hand. 9-year-old Betty Hall lived in Montana with her father Richard. After losing her mother, Betty showed a lot of courage, which often surprised Richard. She also had a big imagination and was very curious. However, something strange started happening. Betty would come home from school without her shoes. When this kept happening, Richard grew worried. Every time he asked her why she came home shoeless, she would just say, "They told me to." This odd behavior made Richard more curious, and he knew he had to find out why it was happening. One day, Richard quietly followed Betty as she walked to the bus stop, making sure not to make any noise so she wouldn't notice him. He watched as Betty was about to get on the bus, but he was shocked when he suddenly saw a hand stop her. Confused and worried, he watched closely, trying to understand why the bus driver wouldn't let his daughter on. The hand belonged to Carol Bell, the strict bus driver. Richard quickly walked over, feeling angry and ready to confront the woman who was stopping his daughter. "Betty, Daddy's here," Richard called out as he got closer. Betty turned around, and her frown turned into a smile when she saw him. Richard immediately confronted the bus driver. "What right do you have to tell my daughter to take her shoes off?" he demanded angrily. Carol seemed unconcerned as she eyed Richard. "What wrong did my daughter do?" Richard pressed further. Dismissively, Carol responded, "Her shoes are always dirty and muddy, and I'm tired of cleaning up after her. It's a safety hazard." The other children were staring and giggling, and Richard realized that he might be embarrassing Betty, but he couldn't let his daughter be treated this way. He had to do something. The bus driver's nonchalant attitude made him even more furious. "That's your job," he retorted. "You're supposed to ensure the safety of the children, not burden them with such requests. Other children have dirty shoes too." By now, the children had fallen silent, and everyone was staring at the angry father. Richard turned towards his daughter, ignoring the bus driver, and told her to take a seat on the bus. Betty gave Carol a knowing look as she walked to her seat. There were now more children filming the confrontation. The other kids on the bus were getting impatient, eager to get going. Someone asked, "Can we go to school now?" Carol simply ignored the question, further fueling Richard's anger. He firmly told her that he was going to file a complaint against her and that he would not back down. But would this threat make her back down? Carol was not about to give in and arrogantly said, "Go ahead and complain. It won't change a thing." She wanted Richard to get off the bus so she could close the door, but he was not budging and stopped the doors from closing. He was not going to be dismissed. Carol's dismissive attitude enraged Richard even more, and he was determined to hold her accountable for her actions. He watched, fuming, as the bus finally drove off. Then, he rushed back up his driveway to make a call to the school principal. Richard arranged to meet with the principal immediately and made his way to the school. He told the principal what had happened and that he expected the school to take action to address the bus driver's behavior. The principal seemed to be taking the matter seriously, but Richard still wasn't sure it would be handled properly. As a concerned father, he explained to the principal how unfair he thought Carol was being. He detailed that their driveway was gravel, and when it rained, Betty had no choice but to get her shoes muddy because there was nowhere else to walk. The school official listened and seemed sympathetic to his concerns. A couple of days later, the school principal called Richard to let him know that the matter had been dealt with. Not only had Carol received a warning, but the school vehicle authority had also been informed of her misconduct. Richard, however, didn't have much faith in the principal's efforts or commitment. He had seen similar cases many times before and didn't doubt that the situation would continue. The kind of person Carol was meant that she would never change. People like her refused to change their ways, and no one could convince them otherwise. But was the worried father correct in this case, or would the driver have a change of heart? At that particular moment, it was irrelevant. Richard was only considering the facts, which made it clear that the school would have remained oblivious to this issue if he hadn't brought it to their attention. What would a simple warning do about it? Carol clearly had a negative mindset. What difference would a minor punishment make to someone like her? Richard knew he needed something more substantial, something that would let parents rest easy knowing their children were safe with their bus drivers. He demanded that the school explain what they would do to alleviate his concerns. What steps could they take to prevent this sort of conduct in the future? To Richard's knowledge, the school administration had simply given the driver a slap on the wrist and left it at that. He had dealt with similar behavior before and was well versed in how to handle someone as obnoxious as Carol. He needed to go further than just a mild warning. Suddenly, the school was facing a huge wave of complaints about the new dash cams. Some parents saw it as the school invading their children's privacy rather than a security measure. These parents didn't understand what the school was trying to achieve with these new strategies. The determined father hadn't expected that angry parents would direct much of their displeasure toward him. He set himself up for a shock when he looked at his social media profile. Many parents believed he was at fault for the increased security measures. However, a large group of other parents supported Richard's actions. The majority of them had actually heard the entire story in context and understood the reasons for his actions. This left the principal in a difficult position, as she wanted to satisfy both parties. Many parents had never understood the context in which the events in the videos occurred, which led them to shun Richard. But others knew what really happened. Once word of the incident started spreading, it soon came to light that Betty was not the only victim of Carol's bullying behavior. It became clear that Carol was rather infamous for her behavior with children, not just because of her unprofessional conduct around them. Several parents revealed that they had experienced situations not unlike Betty's with their own children, yet none of them had been willing to take action like Richard did. He couldn't understand why. Richard had conversations with all the other parents who had spoken up about the treatment of their kids after he had opened this can of worms. What he discovered was appalling. He was shocked to find that numerous parents were too scared to criticize the bus driver publicly. Why not? Had Carol sent them threats? Some parents who stayed silent did so because they were aware of the possible repercussions. They knew they weren't likely to win the fight, but now that they were a united front, they demanded that the school do something. Would they finally get the results they wanted? Richard was worried that riding the bus might hurt his young daughter's self-esteem. He promised Betty that no one would ever humiliate her again. However, after another incident, he had to break that promise. Betty had been getting unwanted attention at school because of the bus incident, but she was thankful to her father for standing up for her and hoped things would return to normal. She trusted that her dad would always protect her, unaware of the challenges she faced in just a few weeks. Betty no longer feared boarding the bus, feeling protected and empowered by what she learned about her rights. The strict bus driver, Carol, also learned a lesson in humility and respect, promising Betty she'd never have to worry about mud on the bus again. It was Carol's job to clean it up. This experience strengthened the bond between Betty and her father and highlighted the importance of standing against injustice. Richard, trying to find a middle ground, decided to have the driveway paved while keeping the house as it was when Betty's mother was alive. Surprisingly, Betty even befriended Carol, and the experience left no negative effects on her. As she grew up, Betty kept her adventurous spirit and always felt safe, knowing her father would stand by her no matter what.